On today's episode of The World Explained, the real story behind Putin's assassination attempt. Russia fires missiles at innocent citizens, and Russian supply lines take a hit. Before we get any further into the video, please like the video and subscribe if you enjoy our content. Now, without any further ado, let's jump into the video. Russia has accused Ukraine of trying to assassinate President Putin by using unmanned drones to target the president's office in central Moscow. Unverified footage has been circulated on social media that shows an object flying over the Kremlin before a small explosion. One video on social media showed smoke rising over the fortified complex. In another, a small explosion was visible above the Kremlin Senate building while two men appeared to clamber up the dome. The two drones in question used to attack the president were shot down overnight, and according to Putin's spokesman, the leader was not in the office then. Moscow claims that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was behind the attack, while Zelensky denies involvement. Addressing the matter in Finland, he said, "We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities." Meanwhile, a Ukrainian presidential advisor said the reported attack could indicate Russia is preparing for a large-scale terrorist provocation in Ukraine and will use this likely fabricated attack as an excuse. I say the attacks were likely fabricated because Mr. Putin has very high personal protection, and according to BBC's Russia editor Steve Rosenberg, it is astonishing that drones could have gotten anywhere near the Kremlin. On top of that, Ukraine closely monitors the movement of the Russian president and would have known Putin was not in Moscow. Russia said the two drones targeting the Kremlin, which is a large government building, and the office of the president in central Moscow were disabled using electronic radar assets. This goes to show that it is impossible for Ukrainian drones to enter Russian airspace without anyone noticing. But still, in a statement, the Russian presidency said last night the Kiev regime attempted to carry out a strike on the Kremlin residence of the president of the Russian Federation with unmanned aerial vehicles. It said it regarded this as a planned terrorist act and an assassination attempt on the president, and Russia reserves the right to take retaliatory measures wherever and whenever is deemed necessary. But they also added that the Russian leader was unhurt, as he worked in Novo-Orgayovo outside Moscow, and will continue his schedule as usual. Fragments of the drone were reported to have fallen on the Kremlin site. Still, no one was hurt, and the building sustained no damage, which adds to my suspicion that it was an inside job, likely approved by the president to escalate the situation further. This sentiment is also shared by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who said he could not validate Russia's accusation that Ukraine had tried to kill Mr. Putin, but said he would take anything the Russian presidency said with a very large shaker of salt. MICK MULROY, a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and CIA officer, said that if reports of the incident were accurate, it was unlikely to be an assassination attempt as Ukraine closely tracks President Putin's movements. He was not in Moscow at the time. According to Ukrainian presidential spokesman Serhiy Nikiforov, the incident in Moscow was designed to escalate the situation before 9th May, the day of the Victory Day parade, which foreign dignitaries were expected to attend. Experts believe that the attacks are a ploy to give Russia the excuse and justify their attack on innocent citizens, which they have been partaking in for the past week with missile strikes on apartment buildings. More on that later in the video. Alternatively, something is happening in Russia, but that seems highly unlikely. This may have been to show the Russian people that they could be hit anywhere, and that the war they started in Ukraine may eventually come home to Russia, even the capital. There is also a possibility that the reports were inaccurate. Russia may be fabricating this as a pretext to target President Zelensky, something they have tried to do in the past. In response to the attacks, Moscow's mayor on Wednesday announced a ban on unauthorized drone flights over the city. Drone flights require a special government permit, and several cities are scaling back this year's Victory Day celebrations. Moving on from likely baseless claims from Russia to what Russia has been doing in Ukraine. Buildings were ablaze as firefighters scrambled to extinguish the fire and save as many lives as possible. On 28 April, Russia hurled missiles at cities across Ukraine, killing 23 civilians, including 4 children, in the first large-scale air attack in 51 days. According to Russian state media, the Russian military targeted Ukrainian reserve units with high-precision guided missiles. But in reality, the missiles struck Uman, Kiev, and Dnipro. Uman, a city that Russian attacks had largely spared. It was now set ablaze as a 9-story apartment building partially collapsed after being hit by a missile. Rescue workers clambered through massive piles of smoldering rubble, searching for survivors and bodies as anxious people stood by. Serhiy Lubivsky, a man who firefighters rescued from the balcony where he escaped with his wife after the explosion blocked their front door, said to reporters, "My neighbors are gone, no one is left." Adding, an elderly woman, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren lived on the 9th floor. They are gone. A man with his son lived on the 8th floor. They are gone. A woman with her daughter lived on the 7th floor. They are gone. A young family lived on the 6th floor. Their son was lucky. He is alive. It is clear to see Russia is a terrorist state, as there's no military object here. The saddest part is that it happened at 4 in the morning, as people were sleeping, despite the building not housing any reservist troops. It was still attacked. The building was just home to peaceful people who were sleeping. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the apartment block was among 10 damaged residential buildings in Uman. The attacks proved what President Zelensky has been saying all this time. Further international action is needed against Russia. After the incident, he tweeted, "Weapons can stop evil. Our defenders are doing it, and it can be stopped by sanctions. Global sanctions must be enhanced." Moscow has previously said that it doesn't deliberately target civilians, while also killing and injuring thousands across Ukraine since it invaded. And while only 3 cities, including the capital Kiev, have experienced missile strikes, 23 missiles were fired. Ukraine's air defense system shot down 21 missiles and 2 attack drones, officials said in a post on Telegram. The attack comes at a very sensitive time as Ukraine prepares to launch a large-scale counterattack to regain some territory currently occupied by Russia. Along hundreds of kilometers of the front, Russia has been fortifying its territory for months in anticipation of Kiev's planned assault, widely expected once warmer weather dries out Ukraine's notorious sucking black mud. In the southeastern city of Dnipro, Regional Governor Serhiy Lysyk said a missile killed a 2-year-old child and a 31-year-old woman. Video released by the authorities showed a blackened hole where a missile had crashed through an apartment window. Moscow said it had targeted locations of Ukrainian reserve troops and had struck them successfully, preventing them from reaching the front while supplying no evidence to support this. Closer to the front, in Donetsk, an eastern city controlled by Russian proxies since 2014, a Russian-installed official said 7 people, including a child, had been killed by Ukrainian shelling that hit a minibus, according to Moscow. And, per usual, no evidence could be found to back the claim. The Russian missile strikes could potentially be to demoralize Ukrainian soldiers and citizens before the counterattack, as Ukraine has made swift gains throughout the second half of 2022, but has kept its forces on the defensive for the past 5 months. Russia, meanwhile, launched a huge winter campaign using hundreds of thousands of freshly called-up reservists and convicts recruited as mercenaries from jail. But despite the heaviest ground combat in Europe since World War II, Moscow captured tiny additional territory, focusing mainly on the small mining city of Bakhmut, where Ukrainians have withstood for almost a year. But if you thought this was the last missile strike Russia did on innocent citizens, you'll be wrong. Because on the 1st of May, 18 cruise missiles were fired from the Murmansk and Caspian regions, and 15 of them were intercepted, said Ukrainian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhnya. Missiles hit Pavlorad in the eastern Dnipropetrovsk region, killing 2 people and wounding 40, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said. 7 missiles were fired at the city, and while most were intercepted, some struck an industrial facility, resulting in fires. According to regional authorities, 24 apartment buildings, 89 homes, 6 schools, and 5 shops reported damage. Missiles also hit 3 other areas in the Dnipropetrovsk region, damaging residential buildings and a school, said Serhiy Lysyk, the region's top official. And while Russia claims that even for these attacks the only targets were military facilities, it is clear that these claims are lies and are acts of terrorism. Meanwhile, Russia's supply lines are coming under fire. On 1st May, the local governor said a Russian freight train was derailed after hitting an explosive in the western region of Bryansk bordering Ukraine. On the same day, officials also reported power lines being blown up in the northern region of Russia. More on that later. FSB, the secret service of Russia that replaced the KGB, called these incidents an act of sabotage. Bryansk Governor Alexander Bogomaz said on Telegram an unidentified explosive device went off, as a result of which a freight train locomotive derailed, adding there were no casualties. The apparent attack comes when Russia is actively launching missiles at apartment buildings, killing innocent citizens, and calling it an attack on Ukrainian reserve forces. To know more about this, check out our previous video on this topic. Bogomaz said that emergency services were working at the scene and rail traffic in the area had been suspended. And while there have been reports of disrupting supply lines by targeted explosions on railroads in Russia and its ally Belarus, this is the first time Russian officials have confirmed an attack of this scale. The incident occurred on Monday at 10:17 a.m. local time between the town of Unecha and the village of Rasoka in the southwestern corner of the region, approximately 100 kilometers or 62 miles from the Ukrainian border. The front locomotive and 7 wagons derailed after the intervention of unauthorized persons in the work of railway transport, adding, "As a result of the incident, the locomotive caught fire," Russian Railways said in a statement. This can be seen in a video making its rounds on social media showing the front of the train and several cargo carriages on fire and lying on the grass next to the tracks. Officials say firefighters have been working at the scene, but it has warned of delays for passenger trains going from the region to Moscow. On the same day, the governor of the northern Leningrad region, Alexander Drozdenko, said local power lines had been blown up by an explosive device. The official said the lines were damaged near the village of Sosanino, 60 kilometers or 37 miles south of Russia's second city, St. Petersburg, and posted images of the lines lying on the ground in a forest. Drozdenko later said that the FSB had opened a criminal case on sabotage due to these incidents. Russian authorities arrested at least 66 Russians on suspicion of railway sabotage since last fall, according to the independent Russian website Mediazona. They also reported an uptick in incidents involving Russia's railway system in the 14 months since Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion of Ukraine. And recently, another Russian locomotive was derailed on the 4th of May. Regional Governor Alexander Bogomaz said a locomotive and several carriages came off the tracks after an explosive device was detonated. Russian Railways described the incident as illegal interference in the work of railway transport. However, there have not been any reported casualties. This news comes at a crucial time when Ukraine is preparing for a full-scale counterattack to retake some of its territory currently occupied by Russia, which I hope will put an end to this long drawn-out war. But the timing is also crucial, as Russia fired missiles across Ukraine in its second pre-dawn strike in 3 days. The attacks caused widespread damage at a logistics hub in Pavlorad near the central city of Dnipro. Dozens of houses were destroyed and 34 people were wounded. Overall, the Ukrainian military said it shot down 15 of the 18 cruise missiles that had been fired. This might be a ploy from the Russian side to demoralize Ukrainian citizens and troops to better their chances in the upcoming counteroffensive. I wholeheartedly hope that this long war with numerous needless casualties ends with Ukraine regaining all of its lands and just and swift punishment being served to the parties responsible for all the bloodshed. And on that note, I end today's episode. And if you found this episode informative, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so the video is pushed to as many people's recommended lists as possible, as everyone should know about the true price Ukraine is paying due to this meaningless invasion. Hope to see you again in the next episode. Thanks for watching.